it's so interesting to me. Libertarian is, you think of political movements sometimes and you have a tendency to group them as a monolith. And the libertarian movement is anything but a monolith. It has, there's this sort of, the side of it that's getting maybe the most attention in this day and age is maybe the kind of more edgelord side of it, that kind of young male. But when I call you the OG, I feel like you were always grounding everything in Friedman and Hayek and, all the things that you imagine libertarianism's foundation is built upon.
That's a clip from my recent interview on The Weekly Show with Jon Stewart. The legendary Comedy Central host and I got into it about libertarianism and capitalism. And I made the case that these philosophies help make us all richer, more productive, and ultimately better off. Here's a little bit more of that discussion.
I think I've always been libertarian curious, if that would be the right.
Every comedian is, right?
I think you would probably have to be.
Because you want to go where the jokes are and you want to be able to think a certain way and then express it. And
that's right.
Yeah. So like every
But here's what I always come up against, and you just brought it up. Years ago, there was a lot of lead in kids' cereal.
Mm-hmm.
And through government regulation, the lead was removed. So how do you square that kind of essential tension?
Yeah. So, and this is where I guess I am grounded, because I'm not an anarchist or an anarcho-capitalist, which a lot of people say, where, no government is ever necessary, or kind of the same thing that anything the government does is by force and theft and is illegitimate. And they also suck at everything they do. Why would we have them do anything? Et cetera. That's one strain of kind of libertarian thinking. I'm much more like Milton Friedman. I become much more of what I call a directional libertarian, which is that I'm not that interested in like, okay, let's build a perfect philosophical foundation that, makes perfect mathematical and philosophical sense. It's like, are we heading in the direction of more individual freedom, where people can live how they want to, where business owners can do what they want to, where things are looser and people are able to make more choices that matter in their lives?
In my mind, the government exists to soften the blow that by definition, exploitative system is going to extract. Capitalism is extractive. They're goods, raw materials, labor. It's got to be the cheapest, drive the highest profits. And the people that will benefit that are necessarily a smaller slice of people, because it's a shareholder operation, not a people operation. And the labor is not valued in the same way that investment or capital is. Capital is king.
Can I push on this a little bit? Because what I was going to challenge is like capitalism is inherently exploitative. The story that progressives tell, capital P progressives in particular, tell about capitalism is that it was awful.
Not awful, but it's a system that requires exploitation and extraction.
Well, here, but so
I mean, it generates more wealth than any other system, no question. But that wealth accumulates unusually at the top. You brought up earlier the 50s, which I thought was a great time, and you're right. But tax rates then were 80% or 90%, and the GI Bill, which was a giant government expense, is what helped build that stable middle class that you're talking about.
Well, first off, nobody paid those tax rates, because those were the printed rates. No, seriously. But that's why things like expense accounts, and all sorts of things were invented for upper level people.
Sure. And they cut all kinds of deductions, and
the main engine,
rich people always find a way out of it. True.
The main engine of things like people being able to buy their own homes and whatnot, it was increases in productivity through industrialization and mechanization. I would argue it was not unionization. It wasn't the GI Bill. I'm not saying those things didn't have an effect, but that it's because we became wealthier, because suddenly we were building an economy that used machines and other things to become massively more productive. Wages went up, not because...
But not at the same rate as productivity. You will always find that wages do not match productivity gains. They'll always lag.
Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they're
Right.
sometimes they're
Mostly-
lower. But like right now
Yeah.
in America, we have like the highest median household income that we've ever had, adjusted for inflation.
Maybe I'm wrong about this. Isn't 50 to 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck?
No, well, you have to look into what that means. 60 plus percent of Americans own their own home, compared to in the 50s, it was much lower. They have college educations, they have more stuff.
Oh, you're saying that our standard of living is now higher comparatively.
Massively higher. And food is cheaper. Everything is more abundant. Plus you get the personal liberty stuff, which I think is part of capitalism. I don't think, it's not like capitalism is an economic thing and then, you can, it's the weekend and you're going to go to Plato's Retreat or Studio 54. They're all part of a same system, right?
Right.
Having said all of that, I mean, just to get back to it, it's like what capitalism does, and there's an economist named Joseph Schumpeter, the guy he coined the term creative destruction. And in a book during World War II called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, he said, the great achievement of capitalism was not making more silk stockings for the queens of England, the queens of Europe, but bringing them in reach of factory girls. Jon Stewart and I also talked about DOGE, free speech, and DEI. Watch the full interview on the Weekly Show's YouTube page.